Hello, everyone. Welcome back to I See What You're Saying, the Disciplined Listening Podcast. I'm Michael Reddington, and today it is my pleasure to welcome our next guest, Greg Dinkin. Greg is a decision coach. He's also a best-selling author, a poker champion, and a keynote speaker. And he has a wide range of perspectives that he brings together to help people get the most out of the choices they make every day. I'm really excited to share this conversation with you. Lots of cool ideas, including how he works with people to focus on decisions, not outcomes. Sometimes we arrive at an outcome regardless of the decision we make, but the decisions we make can always have a big impact on the outcomes we arrive at. It's a great differentiation. He's also going to talk about the importance and techniques for deciding in advance, the formula he uses to create a winner's mindset. He also has 7 empowering questions that we can ask ourselves, and he's going to talk about how we can look at ourselves. Are we acting as a thermostat or a thermometer? It really is an informative conversation. I took a bunch of notes. I know you're going to enjoy it. I really appreciate you being here today. Thank you. While you're here, take a quick second. Please like the show, subscribe to the show, share it with your network, and please leave us your feedback. And while you're online, check out our sponsors. Of course, we have HumanTell. Head over to humantell.com. That's where you can learn how to identify when people's emotions are likely shifting by recognizing changes in their nonverbal communication and facial expressions. I've done it myself. I recommend it. When you're there, enter the code INQUASIVE25 for 25% off the training of your choice. For the professional interviewers, head over to certifiedinterviewer.com to get all your questions answered about both the International Association of Interviewers and the Certified Forensic Interviewer designation. And finally, while you're online, please head over to inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and more to teach them how to unlock the everyday confessions hiding in all of their high-impact conversations. We really appreciate you being here for another week. Thank you so much. So now, without further ado, I introduce to you Greg Dinkin. Good morning, Greg. It is great to see you. How are you today?
I'm phenomenal. Thank you.
I really appreciate you making the time to be here. Thank you so much. When I was getting ready for the conversation, doing the research, there were no shortage of alternative routes to go. And I felt like every time I clicked on another link, there was something else to talk about. But I kept getting drawn back to the title that you have, which is a decision coach. And when you think about all of the important decisions we all have to make in our lives, let alone, executives, leaders, what have you, I was immediately drawn to that. So if you don't mind, let's start here. What does it mean to be a decision coach?
Well, let me start by saying that I wrote a book called The Leading Man. And I went on my personal development journey, and I went to Thailand and Bali and did a lot of soul searching. Some would say navel gazing. And I would meet a lot of women on a similar journey. What I find most of the time with men is men don't really get introspective or look to hire a coach or try to get help until there's a problem or a decision to be made. And the idea of meeting people where they are. So if a man is coming to me for coaching, it's, I need to sell my business, or I got fired from my job, or I want to make a career change, or I'm getting divorced, or I got divorced. And so these key moments, where one has to make a decision. And part of it too is just something different from saying life coach. As a former professional poker player, if you really boil down to what that means, it's just making really good decisions. And so I would say a lot of it is meeting people where they are and just guiding them through these important decisions they have to make.
Very nice. And you mentioned the poker playing background that you have. You've made it to the final table of the World Series of Poker, and I'm sure we'll circle back to that at some point. One of the lines that I saw that really spoke to me was not every bad, and if I'm saying this wrong, correct me, please. It's your quote, not mine. Not every bad outcome is the result of a bad decision. And
in fact, one of my mantras is decisions, not outcomes, decisions, not outcomes. And so you'll hear someone, when they bust out of a tournament, if they have a smile on their face, they'll say, I got it in good. Meaning when I moved all in or I made my bet, I was the favorite. So, and people, it's like, it's very rare that like you have a royal flush and you can't lose. You get in these situations where you're a 60% favorite or an 80% favorite. So, yeah, a lot of people are outcome oriented. And we can't, and that's the beauty. That's why poker is such a great metaphor for life and business. There is a combination of skill and luck. So I just want to say, given the information I had at the moment, did I make the right decision? And if I made the right decision, which is, I thought my opponent had an inside straight draw, and I was an 88% favorite to win the hand, and I got them to put all their money in, and they still hit their card, and I lost my money. I'm happy with my decision. And Daniel Negreanu, a top professional player, he does a daily vlog of the World Series of Poker, and he'll say, "Yeah, I lost 350,000 this week. I played in 8 tournaments." He goes, "But I think I'm playing really well." You say, "Well, what do you mean? You lost all this money?" Well, because the impact of your good decisions aren't always immediate. So he's just saying, did I make good decisions? Did I play well? How was my energy? How was my thought process? Knowing that the outcome isn't okay. I did my best today. I made good decisions. I didn't win because I don't control everything. So you can prepare for the meeting and you can do everything right. And then you find out that, that they're going with one of your competitors because their brother works for them.
Yeah.
So yeah, so I want to be decision oriented, not outcome oriented.
I love that. I absolutely love that. We talk about separating the outcome, the process from the outcome, which is essentially the same thing. One of my favorite examples to give is, and it happens frequently if I'm teaching interviewing, someone will come up to me almost inevitably and say, the first person I ever hired was my best hire, and I've never been able to duplicate it. Well, what really happened was you did a terrible interview the first time, and you just happened to have a great candidate in front of you that you made the decision to hire. You gave yourself credit for identifying a great candidate that just happened to show up that day and repeated a terrible process, and you're now getting terrible results. So to be decision oriented and not outcome oriented is such an important mindset shift. I talk for a living, really. Mindset shift for people, but it really is a critical one that you can do everything right. And sometimes it doesn't break your way, and we can screw up and sometimes get lucky.
It's interesting because I'm working with a client now that a hire that they made is working out really well. But sometimes it's like the exception will prove the rule. But the main key is like, I want to go back to, are you background checking? What is your system? Because they can say, well, this guy's working out great, but it doesn't mean you had a good process. And there's things that you could have flagged. And exactly. And a lot of people get spoiled by early success, right? So, they win their first 3 sports bets and they go, oh, this is easy. I bet on the team because I like their colors and I won, so I'm going to do that again. Yeah, that's being outcome oriented.
So I love that. I'm already fully hooked. Decisions over outcomes. You mentioned the playing the poker, and I know you also talk about strategy a lot, and particularly your next 5 moves is something that you talk about. I've not played a lot of poker. I find that I'm not really good at math, and I'm especially not good at math when I'm drinking. And when I was younger, poker usually involved beer, and that was it for me.
Yeah.
But I'm very curious to learn whether it's always 5 or not. Probably doesn't make that much of a difference. But how do you apply that principle of trying to stay 5 moves or 5 decisions ahead? And maybe more importantly, as I ask a foolish compound question, how do you help people do that as well?
Well, it's a great question. So I was just talking to a client of mine. I do executive coaching, And it was a situation where something just happened and my client said, I'm going to email my boss now. This just happened. And I said, okay, and then how do you think your boss is going to respond? Oh, I don't know. Okay. And it's funny, your next 5 moves was the book that I wrote with Patrick Bet-David. And it was originally called Your Next 15 Moves because he'd watched a documentary about Magnus Carlsen, the chess grandmaster. Yep. And the idea is grandmasters see 15 moves ahead. So this is very common, right? It's like, I want a raise. I want more money. What are you going to do? I'm going to go in and ask my boss for a raise. That's just like first level thinking. It's like, I got a pair of aces. I'm going to bet. So I just start to get people to say, well, okay, you're going to ask, and then what do you think they're going to say? And the common question is, I hadn't thought about it. Okay, well, let's think about it. Okay, well, they're probably going to respond by saying this. Okay, great. And then when they say that, how are you going to respond? And so, because in Texas Hold'em, there's 4 rounds of betting. And so, each move is setting up the next move. So just in that negotiation, most people just hadn't thought really beyond, I'm going to ask for more money. If you can then say, well, let me walk in their shoes, and then I'll offer decision tree this. So they're going to say one of 3 things, right? Or, yes, you deserve a raise, but not as much as you think. No, hard no. Or let me think about it. There's probably only a few ways. And then based on that, you're going to say this. And then it's like, okay, and well, who else is influencing the decision? So all of a sudden, I want to get a raise, I'm going to email my boss. When you think about, because the finish line, is the last hand, you're making a series of moves to get to that. So it really is is slowing down, I think, is one. And then actually taking the time to think through the process.
It's a great reference. And when you talk about slowing down and thinking through the process, putting yourself in the other person's shoes, it's almost like thinking backwards. Like, well, if this is where I want to end up, what decisions do I have to make to get there? And yes, what decisions do I have to be prepared for in order to get there? So it's not just what do I want to say, it's what's the other person going to experience, and how do I make decisions ahead of time in order to handle that interaction. Which, interestingly, I just had another conversation where we were talking about pressure and how pressure can impact actions and decision making. And the gentleman had a great line that pressure is the gift you get for being good. Like, you find yourself in a situation because of your talent that results in the pressure that you're now feeling. But I imagine, especially when it comes to decisions, it's generally easier to make decisions when there isn't that quote unquote pressure than there is when you're under pressure. So especially with your experience, how do you help people go through that, if it's not the right phrase, correct me, decision-making planning process before the pressure hits so they can execute under pressure?
It's a great question. And I can give you the perfect example. So I used to have a literary agency. So I worked with authors and sold their books to publishers. And I had a young guy working for me who was good and ambitious, but was also very emotional. So I said, okay, he was like, set a deadline for this book he was pitching. And he said, yeah, they're going to make an offer. They told me they're going to make an offer tomorrow at noon. I said, okay. And what happens if they don't? I don't know. I go, I know, you're going to freak out. That's what's going to happen. And it's funny because I've sort of shifted a little bit. I always thought emotion was the enemy. Emotion leads to bad decisions. And yeah, if you're in the casino and you just lost money and you're emotional and you go to the ATM, I think there's a time and a place to use emotion. But freaking out emotion is generally not good emotion, right? So similar thing. Okay, they told you they're going to make an offer at noon. There's only a few things that can happen. At noon, they make an offer that's pretty much in line with what you thought. So to that, you're going to have a counter offer, or you're going to have a response ready. You're not going to hear from them at noon. In which case, okay, here's the key thing: decide in advance. Nobody
Yes.
makes a good decision about driving drunk after they just drank a fifth of vodka. So it's pretty simple. Like, we're going to go to the concert and we're going to get smashed. Get a hotel room, hire an Uber, get a designated driver. So it's the same thing, right? Like, yeah, under pressure. And that's why, think about, with, sports teams, they do their 2-minute drill in practice. So essentially, there's only so many things that can happen. So at noon, if you don't hear from them, what are you going to do? Well, I'm going to wait till 12:30. Then what? Are you going to call? Are you going to text? Are you going to email? Have that text or email written, or have that script written. So now noon rolls around, and whether the offer is lower than you thought, in line with what you thought, or you don't hear from them, you already know what you're going to do before it happens. So I think the best way to handle pressure is preparation.
I couldn't agree more. Now, I've never played at the final table of the World Series of Poker, but even in my life, in my reference, I couldn't agree more. And I love what you said about there's only so many things that can happen. I think for the majority of context that we find ourselves in, there are 3 to 5 predictable alternatives that are most likely going to happen. And if it's not just like one of those alternatives, it's friggin' close enough that whatever you prepared for that is going to work for whatever happened adjacent to it. And all too often, people create this unnecessary ambiguity. Well, I'm not prepared because I don't know what's going to happen. I got to wait and see what's going to happen first. No, actually, if you sit down and kind of write this out, to your point, you can pretty much get, like, if you're going to ask somebody a question, if you're contextually aware, you can have a really good idea at the most 3 likely answers that they're going to give you. And because of that, you have a really good idea of how you're going to respond. And now, without going all game theory crazy, you can start to play this forward and start making better decisions that are more likely to lead you to the outcome that you want.
And you alluded to it earlier, the Stephen Covey, begin with the end in mind. And so, hey, if I want to get a raise, and that's, it's not just, hey, I want a raise, give me more money. It's who else is involved in the decision process? What do I need to be documenting? What do I, how do I set them up for this? It might be, if I don't get the money I want, am I prepared to leave? So yeah, it's really just having a plan.
It is. And I also love how you just said, how do I set them up for this? And I feel like for a lot of people, when they hear that, they're like, oh, now you're being dishonest, you're being deceptive, you're being disingenuous. No, we're being strategic, because most of the time in our day-to-day life, we're operating on autopilot, doing what we always do. And if someone's going to interrupt that autopilot with a request, many times, unless that request is perfectly timed and in line with what we're thinking or doing at the moment, we're going to push it away. So if that's the default reaction we're likely or could likely run into, then having the right strategy of moves to, quote unquote, set them up to consider the decision is the absolute right way to take it. And it is strategic. It is not dishonest or deceptive. So I love hearing you say that.
Yeah, well, and look, I think a lot of it is asking the right questions.
Sure.
And there's a great book, Influence by Robert Cialdini.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
It's like the Bible. So I'll probably get the details wrong. You may know it, but people are walking on a college campus, and there's a charity, there's a setup, and said, "Excuse me, can you donate $10?" And I think it was like 14% of people gave.
Yep.
But then they changed it to, "Excuse me, could you donate $100? How about 10?" And then it went to like 70%.
Yeah.
So just by thinking through it, I'm going to say 100, and then I'm going to pivot to 10. You just went from 14% to 70%. So, I mean, that's just a really good example of one question that came before it changed everything.
Yeah. And for people who haven't read that Influence book, hit pause, go buy the book, come back and listen to the rest of the conversation. I mean, the book is that important. Go read it.
Well, I represented Phil Gordon, who was a champion poker player. I was his agent, and also a great entrepreneur. And he goes, this is years ago, he goes, you haven't read that book? He goes, if you don't finish that book in a week, you're fired. Like, if you're my agent if you're and you haven't read that book, I appreciated that from Phil. Like, yeah, like that's the Bible. 'Cause, I mean, like he talks, there's so much in there, but about
Yeah.
reciprocity.
Yep.
Yeah, there's so many. So it's really a must read for influence. But yeah, so I mean, I remember years ago, my brother was selling business telephone systems. So again, you don't just start saying, "Hi, do you need a new business telephone system? I want to sell you something." But he called this guy who had a stereo store, and they closed at 6 o'clock. And my brother said, "What happens if someone calls you at 6:15?" Well, later the guy was telling the story, and he said, "The minute you asked me that question, I knew I was going to buy from you." Because that guy recognized that my brother was being thoughtful, was being strategic, was genuinely curious. And I know we'll talk more about listening, but was genuinely curious, and based on that question, he knew he knew he had the right guy to buy from.
Yeah, another phenomenal example. And earlier, you talked about looking back and evaluating the decisions we make, regardless of the outcome. And I'm paraphrasing again, so if I screw it up, forgive me, it's unintentional. Basically, the sentiment was, did I make the best decision based on all the information I had available at the time? And generally, we get the information we had available at the time based on the quality of the questions that we ask. Whether I'm
Sure.
asking you, whether I'm asking myself, whether I'm asking the internet, whatever it is, the quality of the questions I ask are going to beget the information that then drives the decisions that create the outcome. So you're 100%. You mentioned listening. So when you are helping people through that decision-making process, it's a ridiculously open question for you, but what
Sure.
specific role does your approach to listening play in that process?
It's interesting. I have a coach myself. In some ways, I think she's better than I. A lot of people are impatient. So I think if I'm really doing my best, I'm really asking good questions. And it's interesting, I'll say this, I'll ask a question and they'll go, "You're right." If you ask a question and someone says you're right, what they're saying is, you're asking me a question that I'm answering, and I've already gotten to the end. And I go, "No, no, no, I'm not trying to be right. I'm genuinely asking what you're thinking." So look, but to answer your question, it's really getting people to reflect. So the better questions you can ask so they can reflect, the better information they're going to get. And it's funny. I was reading in your bio. So when you think about poker, and I grew up without social media.
Me too.
I know I look young, but I just turned 80 last week. But in poker, the whole idea is like, keep your cards close to the vest.
Mhm.
And you don't want to give any information. You want to get information. And so I was talking about this in a keynote I gave. It was fascinating to me. It still fascinates me now that with social media, people are just giving all like, I don't even understand Venmo, how people make things public. Like, I really want to know that, like, I paid Michael $22 for pizza. Like, why is it anybody's business? I find it fascinating. So people are constantly giving information. Trying to tie this back to a question you asked me. But in terms of listening, I'll give you an example. Some guy was trying to sell me on PR. And we got on the call, and I said something about, "Oh, I said this in my TED talk." And he goes, "You gave a TED talk?" And I'm like, "You're out.
Yeah.
Like, you didn't spend 30 seconds on my website." So for all we talk about in poker, like, the non-verbals and the tells, and how do you read people and how do you get that information? I think you really start by saying so much of it is available. So I think in terms of getting information and being a better listener or making any decision, you really want to, if you're doing a business call with somebody, did you Google that person? Did you go on their LinkedIn? Did you read, you lived in Chicago, you went to University of New Hampshire, is that right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So it's like, get the information that's available first. Go on people's social media. But yes, I guess so much information is available to you. And so when it comes to listening, I think it starts with, I genuinely am curious and want to find out all I can first.
Yeah, that curiosity, I think that patience and the curiosity together that you mentioned, in many ways, that's the basis for the magic elixir. If I can slow down, if I can focus on the outcome, if I can stay patient and stay curious, I'll learn more. And learning is gathering intelligence. Intelligence feeds better decisions. Better decisions create better outcomes. And you're absolutely right on the social media. I look at it more from a investigator's mindset, but it's the same thing. Like, why the hell would you put all this stuff out there? Like, just for anybody to find at any time. And for anybody that I'm going to have a conversation with, if it's only 5 minutes, it's just a quick social media search, Google search. My son plays sports teams. You don't think I'm searching every single coach that he's ever played for, and like the people, the parents, and who am I around? And it's not because I think they're bad people. It's I want to know who I'm around. I have the opportunity to educate myself. Why would I turn that opportunity down? And that education creates a higher level of contextual awareness. The higher level of contextual awareness adds value and accuracy to your observations, which then adds value to your questions, which adds value to the intelligence and the decisions. And we're going through this whole thing again. So I couldn't agree more. The power of context, I think, is something that is often overlooked. And I've never, like I said, I've never played poker. I mean, I've played drunk with a couple of buddies, but I've never really played poker. But often if I'm teaching, if body language comes up, people will make poker references. In conversations, the same behavior can mean 100 different things depending on the context that it happens in. And I would have to believe that reading poker tells that everybody likes to talk about, it's probably pretty similar, that the context is really driving the awareness. And I'm going to get way over my skis. How many hands are we in? What's the pot? What's their chip stack? What are the cards on the table? How many hours have we been at this? Like, all of this comes into your observations. So I'm curious, in your background, what role did context play in how you observed others and then made decisions based on your observation?
Yeah, it's a great question. And first of all, with tells, as you know, you need a baseline first. Yeah. And funny, Phil Gordon, I mentioned earlier, told a story. Generally, if somebody is shaking a little bit, again, there's always an it depends in poker, but it's more likely that they have a good hand. Just take that at face value.
Sure.
And so he's telling a story about how he's in a hand with this guy and he's shaking a little bit. So Phil reads that he has a strong hand. And later the guy says, no, I gave up drinking today and I'm still detoxing a little bit. So, you need a baseline. And, the whole, like, did they look up or did they look left, or these subtle things? I find that's much less important than context. Motive is number one. And so, of course, at the poker table, they have a reason to lie. But even the simplest thing of, like, either they want me in or they want me out. So one of the things we say in poker, and I think this really applies to life, is strong, and this is back to Mike Caro's book, The Book of Tells, is strong is weak and weak is strong. So if I'm betting and staring at you and I want you out of my pot, right, it's generally because I'm weak. Whereas, they say the most dangerous poker player that turn at the table is the one who's not looking at you, because they want you in. And so, people overcompensate. If someone's bragging, it doesn't necessarily mean they're lying, but I just go, why are they bragging? They're probably insecure about something. Bullies are generally weak. If the guy says, I'm going to kick your ass, no, like, if he was really going to throw a punch, he wouldn't telegraph the punch. It's the guy in the bar that's not saying anything. So yeah, so I think context is everything, and motive as well. So I first asked the question, does this person have a reason to lie? I start there. And then, and then you look at the context, you look at the body language, but yeah, it's really, and so just like a detective, you're looking for inconsistencies, you're looking for patterns.
And that pattern recognition is huge. And the baseline is probably the first piece in any pattern that you mentioned. I can't compare variables. I have to have some sort of constant to compare variables against. And I mean, again, confessing my lack of poker knowledge, but that was a great illustration of they either want me in or they want me out. So if I can figure out if I think they likely want me in or out, then I have a better idea of how I should be reacting based on the observations, or what decisions I should be making based on their observations, of course, in comparison to what you're holding in your hand.
In
so
poker, it's find out what they want and do the opposite, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, if they want me to call, it means they have a good hand, so I'm going to fold.
I love that. Find out what they want and do the opposite. I think that's another great way to look at it.
I would say in business, find out what they want, and if you can, give it to them.
Yeah. Especially if you can give it to them in a way that leads to what you want.
Yeah. And also, like, how do you know what they want? And that's where the listening comes in, and that's where the paying it. I mean, I'm sure you studied Chris Voss, the FBI hostage negotiator. It's like, it's all about listening. It's all about getting more information.
Yeah, information should be driving. You mentioned it at the start of the conversation, should be driving our decisions. And for me, if I have honestly, I try to get in the habit of deconstructing processes that led to outcomes, whether they were good or bad. Like, is there something happened that I should be repeating or avoiding or changing or adapting? But especially if the outcome isn't what I wanted, it's what did I miss? Like, what didn't I ask for? What opportunity did I miss? And to your point, maybe it's nothing. Maybe we really did everything we could, and there was something out of our control that broke, and it just, that sometimes you win some, sometimes you lose some. But oftentimes, armchair quarterback yourself, we can figure out that had I asked a different question, or had I latched onto a different part of their response, or had I not been somewhere else, that maybe we could have got to a different outcome. I missed the opportunity.
Yeah, and I want to talk about debriefing. So there's in poker, if someone tells a bad beat story is a complaint. I had aces and this drunk guy called me, and there's like a tradition. If you want to tell a bad beat story, you have to give somebody $1, because it's like, no one wants to hear your bad beat story. My horse was way ahead and the jockey fell. It's a victim story. It's a complaint. So yeah, you want to tell me your bad beat story, you got to pay me for it. But the opposite is, if someone says, let me tell you about a hand, very different from let me complain about a hand. Let me tell you about a hand. Let's talk through it, right? So same thing with the deal. We spent 3 months with this client. We asked these questions. We thought these were their needs. We went into the meeting. We presented, and we didn't get the deal. Now, the deconstructing and the debriefing, that's really valuable. So I love talking about hands. I love talking about situations. Let's debrief. Let's see where we went. And there's an openness to that versus just, here's my bad beat story. I lost the deal. I can't catch a break, blah, blah, blah.
And the world's crumbling down around me. It couldn't possibly be my fault.
Yeah. So it's that accountable. So even the story of like, they bought from my competitor because their brother, worked for them. I think a good question is, could I have known that?
Yeah.
And maybe there was a breakdown in the process that, actually we could do more research. If that was public information, then you missed. If there was no way you could have known, then you say, all right, that's just variance, that just happens. But if you could have known, you missed something in the process.
And a personal, I say personal philosophy, but certainly something I've learned from many others, is that if I'm not taking that accountability, not to beat myself up and be like, oh, I suck, I'm terrible, I'm never going to be good. But if I don't look for where those missed opportunities were, then we're never going to get better.
Yeah.
Which I think might lead us to something else that you write about, which is the winner's mindset. So
Yeah.
for you, what differentiates a winner's mindset from everybody else?
Well, could go a lot of directions with this. Well, let's start here. There's a book called The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks, and I just think this concept can be revolutionary for people. The difference between a thermostat and a thermometer. A thermometer just tells you the temperature. A thermostat says, I have the ability to set the temperature. And so, like my friend Matt, his temperature, his money thermostat was at $10,000. This is a true story. And if Matt had 22,000 in his bank account, he'd buy a $12,000 motorcycle that he didn't need. He'd get down to 10. And if he had six, he'd book a job for $4,000 to get to 10. And it's like, Matt, why don't you just set your thermostat high? What do you want to set it at? 50,000, a million, 2 million? And he set it, and he decided to set it higher. And so I think the winner's mindset starts with the belief that you get to choose this is for wealth, health, relationships, happiness, all of these things. So when you start with, I get to choose where I set my thermostat, I believe that's the starting point. Because the notion of just work hard and put in the effort, put in the time, if you don't know where you're going and why, and believe that you can get there, I think that the belief that you can get there is really what drives the behavior.
I would agree 100% that often if we have the belief that we can reach, then we can justify or rationalize the effort it takes, the sacrifice it takes to get there. If we don't have the belief, then it becomes harder to make those sacrifices, to change the behavior, to get out of potentially, I don't want to say bad, but maybe suboptimal thought patterns, behavior patterns in order to make that adjustment. So I think you said it very well.
Yeah. And then, and I talk a lot about how do you change your mindset, and a lot of it is, we benchmark against our peers. So if you're a new sales rep, and you say, well, that guy who's a lot like you, right? He also went to community college. He started when he was 20. He's 23 now. He's been here 3 years, and he made $375,000. And you're looking at the guy go, he didn't seem any smarter than me. How did he do it? Let me tell you how he did it. He did this training. He put in the time. He put in these hours. He made the cold calls. He studied. Now, if I look at LeBron James and say, well, I'm not going to be 6'9" and have a 45-inch vertical leap, but you go, wow, that guy doesn't really seem to have anything different than me. And he made $375,000. If I believe I can accomplish that, now I'm going to put in the work to make the cold calls, to do the training, to go after. If I believe it's possible, then yeah, I'll put in the work.
As we talk about believing in what's possible, as I go backwards through all of the reading I did before we got together, I believe you also have 7 empowering questions that we can ask ourselves in order to improve. I'm assuming, like everything you said before, health, wealth, performance across the board. We certainly don't need to go through all 7. I'm not asking you to give away everything that you do, but what are some of the more important questions that we should be asking ourselves in order to change our mindset, our decisions, and our outcomes?
Yeah. Well, the first one that I think about is, what does an ideal day look like? And this story started. This was like during the mortgage boom, and my brother was in the mortgage business, and he was talking to these guys, and it's like, we just got to grow. We need growth. And my brother's like, why do you want to grow? And in some ways, it was such a ridiculous question to ask at a business meeting. What do you mean, why do you want to grow? Just growth. That's what business is about. But you actually stop and think, like, why am I doing this? It actually reminds me of, like, I'm sure a lot of your listeners, you've heard the Mexican fisherman story.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, where you have this Mexican fisherman, and he fishes for a few hours, and then hangs out on the beach and cooks and plays music and hangs out with his friends. And then this Harvard MBA says, why don't you work longer and more and build a business, and then you can have a shipping operation, and you put in 15 years and you'll make all this money, and then what? Well, then you can work for a few hours, go fishing for a few hours, and hang out on the beach and hang with your friends. So, because look, some of the stuff of like, what is my purpose? What is my mission? What am I here for? These are really, really big questions. But I think if you start with, what is my ideal day? I wake up, how do I feel? I feel refreshed. I feel excited. Who am I with? I wake up next to my partner. And then, what do I want to do? Well, I want to do something active. I want to be outside. I want to be of service. I want to find something challenging. So I think when you start with the ideal day, that really directs you into, because look, I mean, your life is, an ideal day is then creates weeks, creates months, creates years. I think it's a really good place to start, because if you can figure out what you want to do every day, I think that's going to lead you down the path of what you're trying to build and create.
I like that a lot. So once we have our ideal day in mind, are there particular decisions or steps that you walk people through to go from concept to, and I say this in air quotes, achievement, like actually working towards achieving that vision?
Yeah. So, a question I'll ask is like, so you get really clear on in your ideal day, and this is where the honesty and the awareness comes in. Where am I now?
Yeah.
And then actually, this is a great question because it ties everything together. Is there a gap between my ideal day or my ideal life and the life I'm living now? Usually the answer is yes.
Sure.
The only way, to me, how do you get, if you guys can see my hands, but to get from point A to point B is really just thoughts and actions. So you could also say mindset and habits.
Yeah.
Right? Like, to get, and that's, you brought the mindset up earlier. I don't think it's just work harder. I don't think it's just do more. That's the actions and the habits. Because if you don't address the mindset and your thoughts, then you can sabotage yourself. So really, the only to get there is thoughts and actions, which is another way of saying mindset and habits. So I mean, look, for me, one of the biggest things, like I've been being a night owl served me well as a poker player, because the game is always better at 2 a.m. than 2 p.m. And I've also done a lot of writing late at night, but I want to be more of a morning person. I think it's healthier. I think it's better, for circadian rhythms. Like, the habit that I can put in there is like getting in bed at 10:30 in a cool, dark room without my phone in the room. That's the habit. That's the action. And so if I do that, that's going to lead me to waking up refreshed and ready for the day.
That's a great point. And just to tag on to that, for me, one of the habits I had to change was, because my phone's my alarm clock, probably like most people, leave the phone in the master bathroom, not next to my bed. So that way I actually have to get out of bed to shut the damn thing off. And now I'm already up. So like the hardest decision of my day is already made. Getting out of bed so hard, make it a non-decision. Now I make the decision the night before, to your point, not in the moment. And now I'm up and now I'm moving.
And your alarm is loud enough that you can hear it. Yep. Okay. Yeah, that's great. That's a great tool. In fact, mine broke. So I just bought like a little alarm clock, analog, so I can keep my phone outside. Nice. But yeah, so really just look, you want to create the life you want the ideal day, mindset, and habits, or thoughts and actions. And I think both are important.
I would agree. To circle all the way back to the beginning of the conversation, you talked about the time that you spent in Thailand. I think you said Bali as well. And you mentioned how a lot of times as men, we don't get super introspective. I wouldn't even necessarily say until there's a problem. It's like after the problem, if we're lucky. Like, here's the problem, the decision I have to make. Either I got through it or to some degree I didn't. So now it's time to be introspective about it without getting too personal. And I'm sure a lot of what you're talking about here are lessons that you derived from that experience already. So, but without getting super personal, what did you learn through that experience that has helped shape your approach to life and to challenges ever since?
One of my favorite answers to a question I ask. So this notion of, do we need to hit a bottom to change? And that's a pretty common question. And most people would say yes, right? Like, right. Most people don't change until something bad happens. And so I asked that question to this guy I met in Thailand, Chaz, do you need to hit a bottom to change? And his answer was, not if you're paying attention. And so, part of my story, for better or for worse, it's funny because some people would say worse. I didn't have a heroin problem, right? It wasn't like I had a heroin problem and I crashed my car, and I was on my last breath and I said, enough is enough. That's not my story. My story, and it's funny because a lot of people say, well, that's a gift, right? Like, it's not until you're struggling for your last breath that you fully appreciate life and you really, understand the importance of change. So my message is just, why wait? Like, set your back to that metaphor, set your thermostat. Like this, I want to be in vibrant health. Therefore, I'm going to take these actions. To me, seems like a better approach than I'm going to wait till I have a heart attack and then I'm going to work on my health. So, it's really just and that's why, right? Like, I got a phone call from one of my best friends to say, I got divorced. I'm getting divorced. And I'm like, where was the phone call a year ago that you're struggling in your marriage? So just to bring it back, I think my approach in life is take the time to get really clear on what you want and go create it. And why wait for something bad to happen to go do it?
It's a great way to look at it. And I guess to answer the question you didn't ask, it's so easy for most of us to get caught up either in our day-to-day lives, tasks, routines, excuses, rationalization. So to break that cycle can be, it's difficult for all of us, certainly more difficult for some than others, without that real dramatic, it's the word that I'm looking for. I'm losing it. But it's a physics term. I lost it. But without a real dramatic reason to turn around and change, whatever. Yeah. I had a better word in mind. I couldn't find it. Everyone can.
Or the catalyst. Or
yes. Thank you. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
So look, and I think, my message to people is like, the catalyst is just your life, and look, one thing, especially as I get older, my enemy is really regret. Like my biggest fear is, am I going to die with my music in me? And so it's less, I'm not being driven by like adversity or something in front of me. It's more the thought of like, how am I going to feel when I didn't do my best? I listened to an interview yesterday with Ryan Holiday did, and he was talking about, stoicism and, discipline and courage and these things. But he said, none of it matters without justice. I think justice is one of the 4 pillars. And I would also, in this case, justice would be synonymous with service, like doing really good work. And so the idea of like, I want to go to bed early and I want to get stronger and I want to have a meditation practice and I want to do all these things. And we are in this biohacking era, and I take a sauna every night, but it comes back to like, why? Well, I want to be more alert and better rested and stronger so I can do really high quality work. And so, I'm not battling a specific adversity or a roadblock right now. I'm battling regret. If I don't do this, how am I going to feel about myself? And it's funny because I just moved into a house. I spent a lot of time decorating. Like the painters are here today. And I just feel like Edward Norton's character in Fight Club, where your life is like an IKEA catalog and you're buying furniture. And I'm like, that's all okay. Like having a nice home and feeling comfortable here, but it's a means to an end. And it to me, just decorating to decorate, to have a nice place is self-indulgent. I think I'm coaching myself right now, but decorating and setting my house up to then feel better, to feel more grounded, to build community, to want to bring people here as a means to justice, service, doing great work, that gets me excited. And so I can't even remember the question. How did I get on this? Maybe you can bring me back.
We were talking about the catalyst. So making the shift without the big catalyst.
Right. So in this case, I'm clear on what I want from life. Like I really working on some projects. And to be efficient, to be of service, to be of justice, to make an impact, I want to give myself the best chance. And to do that, I want to feel grounded. I want to feel healthy. I want to sleep well. I want to be strong so I can put in that effort.
Again, if we can tie it to an outcome, we can rationalize and justify the effort that goes into it.
Yeah.
I really appreciate everything that you shared. I'm looking at the clock, and at some point I got to try to bring this thing home, or you and I are going to be talking all morning until you get fed up with me continuing to ask questions. But I appreciate all the perspective that you've shared. For the people that are listening to this and they want to know more, either engage with you, read your books, find your TED Talk, where do people need to go so they can continue to learn from and engage with you?
I appreciate it. And I'm going to tell you that I want to ask you one question as well. But yeah, it's just gregdinkin.com, my website, LinkedIn, Instagram. It's just Greg Dinkin. What specifically makes people open up? I mean, you said what gets people to confess, what gets people to want to work hard, and gets people to say yes. What's the secret sauce there?
I find it all starts in a lot of ways. This relates back to Cialdini too, is helping them save face and protect their self-image. Is how do I ask somebody? And it's usually not just one question. You gave some examples where one question cracks it open. And sometimes it is just one question. But oftentimes, if we go back to what you said, or the kind of time what you were talking about, there might have been a couple of moves before that maybe didn't necessarily feel like moves or wasn't intentional, but helped somebody get to the place they needed to be for us to ask them the question to get them to open up. So anytime I'm engaging with somebody and I need to get them to share, like we were talking about earlier, sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences, I want to make a couple assumptions. They probably have more motivation to withhold information than to share it. That doesn't make them a bad person. That makes them a human being. Yeah. And that even with that, I'm going to need to give them the opportunity to save face and protect their self-image. So how I engage with them, how I phrase the question, the order that I ask, we use a technique, illustrate before you investigate. So am I going to make some statement of understanding before I ask the question? All of these things will go a long way into helping somebody open up. Two run-of-the-mill examples, just before I forget. One is I don't want to ask somebody, do you have any questions? Because if I ask somebody, do you have any questions? If they're worried about me thinking that they're stupid or not listening or incapable, they're just going to say no. So instead, I want to say, I might preempt it with, I know that was a lot. And that might have made a lot of sense up here, not necessarily out here. How many questions did I just create? And now it's on me, it's not on you. So there's that risk of you being embarrassed goes away. Another everyday example. I don't want to ask somebody, do you know how to do this? Or do you remember how to do this? Or can you do this? Because there's only one socially acceptable answer to that question, whether you know how to do it or not. So instead, I could ask questions like, How long has it been since you've had to? Who was the last person that showed you? How often are you required to? And now, if there's hesitation in your answer, I can come back and say, how helpful would it be if we took just a couple of minutes to go back over it? And so I can constantly search to help people save face so they don't feel like they have to defend themselves. And it's a cheesy way to say it, but they feel psychologically safe telling the truth.
This is fascinating. So let's just say, because in my book, The Leading Man, I reference a lot of books. And certainly every reader has different feedback. Some will say, oh, that's interesting because you told me where to look. Some people would say, but some people would say, I felt dumb because I hadn't read these books. So if I had said to you, oh, have you heard of Cialdini? Have you read it? And the answer is no. So I'll reference a lot of authors, I'll reference things, and people will say, now I could say it's not my responsibility for how you feel, but if I ask someone, yeah, I like that look. If I ask someone if they've read a book and they haven't, I think sometimes they do so better ways. How can I rephrase that question better so people don't feel less than?
Yeah, and I'll explain the look. I wasn't trying to get a reaction out of you. There's times where we should take no responsibility for how people feel. But the bottom line is, if you and I are trying to accomplish something together, then I am the architect of our communication experience. And if I don't take responsibility for how you feel, then I'm not taking responsibility for the outcome.
I agree.
That's a decision I'm abdicating. I'm not actually taking. So there's 100 right answers probably to the question that you asked, but I would default to some sort of face-saving statements and then ask. So it could be, is a parent and a executive, none of us have enough time to read all the books we want. I'm curious, have you had the time or opportunity to sit down and digest what Cialdini has written? And now if you come back and say, no, I haven't, you're not telling me you haven't read the book. You're telling me you haven't had time because you're a busy executive / parent. So it's like, I'm giving you the excuse to say you haven't. But if you have,
if I'd say I'm a nerd, or, I love this stuff, but most of my clients don't read books, but I'm just curious, have you heard of this book, Cialdini?
Yeah. Or I'm a nerd. I read probably more than I should. I could pick up another couple of hobbies to fill that time. And I feel like sometimes that's what people rely on me for. I'm curious, how familiar are you with Cialdini's work?
Okay.
And now if I say how familiar, they don't even have to answer. Like if I see them searching for it, I know the answer is I'm not. Okay. So then I can come back. I won't even force them to answer. If I know not everyone can see us right now, but if you ask me, how familiar are you with Cialdini's work? And I make a face like this, it's like that $100 versus $10 example you gave from Cialdini earlier. As soon as I hesitate, you can come back and say, nobody has all the time to read all the books they want. One of the reasons why I recommend Cialdini is, and now I've let you off the hook, you don't feel embarrassed and you're more likely to listen.
The reason people lie is because the truth is unflattering.
Yeah.
So if I say, Michael, I got tickets to your favorite band in Vegas this weekend. Let's go. It's on me. And you say, and you say no. And it's like, maybe you're afraid of flying, or maybe you don't even have money for the Uber to the airport. So you're going to lie if the truth is unflattering.
Yeah.
I'm really trying to get to this. So when you're saying everything is self-image. So people will, I feel like I want to dive. I'm going to buy your book. I got to dive more into this.
And I would love to continue the conversation with you about it. I do have another meeting I got to jump off to here in just a second. We're okay. But yeah, I want people to feel better about, so you talk to Cialdini for a second. So one of his now 7, what does he call it? The elements of persuasion. Element isn't the word he uses. I'm forgetting it at the moment. But one of them is consistency. In a lot of ways, consistency is the most powerful. And people try to use consistency as almost like foot in the door type of approach, which can work. Well, you already said this, so now you've got to do that. And honestly, that's a thing like con men and con women will do. Like, I'll slowly pull you along until it's too late to get out. But the most powerful way often to capture or take advantage of consistency is I want to frame a decision, an action, communication to be consistent with how people see themselves thinking, talking, acting in a given context. So if I'm asking you to if I'm asking you to do something that you see to be outside of your self-image, you might do it, but the hurdles to get there are going to be higher, and the amount of commitment you have is likely going to be less because, should I do this? Should I not? What's this going to be like? But if I can figure out a way to line it up with your self-image, now it will likely get there a lot quicker. A quick cheesy example. I was doing an interrogation a long time ago. Very long story short, I'll give you the details later. As I was interviewing a guy who was suspected to be involved with a criminal organization, he was suspected of some fraud. I'm interviewing him, and during the interview, he tells me that his brother manages the loading dock. And if you work in a building with the loading dock, statistically speaking, that's the most likely place for theft to occur. So now in my mind, I'm like, okay, if I can get this guy on the fraud, I got to get him to snitch on his brother. Well, most people aren't going to snitch on their brother, especially if they're rumored to be involved in other criminal organizations. So after he gave me his confession to the majority of the fraud we thought he was responsible for, I thanked him for it and told him I was jealous of him. And he looked at me like I was from another planet. And I said, you work with your brother? He says, yes. I said, you see him every day? He says, yeah. I said, my brother's my best friend. He lives halfway across the country. I only get to see him twice a year. That's pretty special. And without going into like details that would hurt my credibility, I told him how when we were young, my dad taught us, no matter what, you've always got to take care of your brother. Even if you're arguing, even if you're mad at each other, you always take care of each other. And as we grew up, everybody knew if John was there, Mike was on the way, and vice versa. And he starts nodding his head. And so after using that story, which was true, the question I then came back and asked him was, what's the most expensive item you and your brother have ever taken off the loading dock together? At which time he said the air compressor and started snitching on his brother. So by telling that story of I'm jealous, you hang out with your brother, I don't. A brother has to back his brother's play. I'm no longer asking him to snitch on his brother. I'm asking him to tell me the last time he backed his brother's play, which is something that brother to brother we can understand. And now it's easier to open up and talk about it.
That's fine. All right. I'm going to read your book.
Oh, I appreciate it. And let's talk again, man. I'd love to continue the conversation.
All right, Michael. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I'll put all the links to everything, that all of your websites, books, everything, so people can find them in the show notes.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Take care, man. Thank you. Greg, thank you for a great conversation. I really appreciate all of the ideas and examples that you shared from the various aspects of all the things that you do. I know I learned a lot. I hope everybody else listening did well. Thank you. And I really enjoyed how you talked about planning 5 moves ahead. I wish I was a lot better at chess, but the impact that we can create and the outcomes that we can achieve by planning that far ahead, heck, the resistance we can avoid, the problems we can avoid by planning that far ahead really makes a big difference. I didn't expect you to spring a math problem on us, but I really liked how you shared thoughts plus actions equals mindsets and habits. Very important to hang on to that. I thought it was especially powerful how you talked about outcomes aren't always immediate. Now more than ever, we tend to look for those immediate responses, those immediate achievements, outcomes. But in reality, the outcomes we're really looking for, the ones that we need the most, are likely much further down the road. I learned a ton. Thank you so much. And thank you to everybody that listened to another conversation today. We truly appreciate you being here. Hopefully you learned a lot as well. While you're here, just take a quick second. Please like the show, subscribe to the show, share it with your network, and share your feedback with us, please. And while you're online, check out our sponsors. Head over to humantel.com, enter the code INQUASIVE25, and that's where you can get 25% off the best in-class online training to identify when people's emotions are likely shifting by recognizing changes in their nonverbal communication and body language. That's over at humantel.com. For the professional interviewers, get all your questions answered about both the Certified Forensic Interviewer and the International Association of Interviewers over at certifiedinterviewer.com. Learn everything you need to know about all the opportunities with the association and what it takes to earn the designation and what it can mean for your career over at certifiedinterviewer.com. And finally, while you're online, please check out inquasive.com. That's where you can learn more about the programs our clients ask us to custom facilitate for their senior leaders, sales teams, HR teams, and more, as we teach them how to encourage people to share sensitive information under vulnerable circumstances in the face of consequences. We really appreciate you being here for another week. Thank you so very much. Stay safe, take care of each other, and we'll see you next time.